William, this week we're talking about why does your dog bury its bones? And there actually is a reason behind this. This is not just something random. I went and looked up. We've got a dog temporarily in our care
Mm-hmm.
this week. And the first thing it did when I went to give it a bone after we'd had it all set up, and is that he would take it and he literally went, made a little hole, dropped the bone in, used his nose to cover it up. And I was like,
Yeah.
no, no, no. So I handed it another little one. And it just became a repetitive little thing. And then I took
Mm.
a little Busy Chew
Mm-hmm.
toy and I handed him that. And he went and found a different hole to put. Okay, well, I know a little history about this one dog, and I've seen it around a lot of other animals. I've never seen it go without food, but I was like, okay, is it the environment? What's going on? And then it's like, when was the last time I actually had a dog that actually buried a bone? And I have to say, I was living in East Texas at the time as a
Mm.
kid. I mean, I don't, not something I see all the time. So I thought, oh, let me go look this up and see if we can talk about that this week. So is the behavior based off the dogs just being something instinctual, environmental, or it's got some little issues, or it's afraid?
The bearing of the bone is a bit of possessive behavior. So it's not necessarily it doesn't necessarily indicate that there's a problem. It can indicate competition, but some dogs are just more prone to develop that behavior. Some dogs instinctively do it. Even if they don't have anything going on, like even if they eat well, they're well taken care of, even if there is no competition, some dogs just have that strong desire to do that. And it basically comes down to the possessive traits that they'll have. Just to ask you a couple of questions, how long have you had this dog?
I've had this dog for about 4 days in my care, but I've seen the dog off and on for months.
So you've known this dog. You
Yes,
have a little bit of an idea.
and then I have been around some siblings of this litter.
Now, this particular dog, do you see any other behaviors that point towards any sort of possessive traits?
No, the only thing I could say that I've witnessed in the past with the dog at its home is that there's a competition of a lot of cats, we'll just say. And it is the most gentlest dog when it comes to that. I mean,
The cats will go up and take the food from the dog. The dog will be eating, and when the cats come up, the dog will leave the food and let the cats.
Okay, okay, that makes sense.
but as far as that goes, I mean, it just don't see anything. I mean, there's not a growl, no form of aggression.
Yeah.
Just steps aside.
Yeah, so what you might be encountering with this dog is it might be a combination of it's an inherent trait for that particular individual combined with it has a history of competition. You know what I mean?
Okay.
But it's not uncommon. You don't see it very often. There are some subtle signs of possessive behavior. Like some dogs will do, some subtle possessive behavior is like when, let's say you're hanging out with a dog and then your spouse or one of your children or somebody comes over close to you and you see the dog getting between you and your spouse, between you and your child. That is a subtle possessive behavior. So there are a bunch of behaviors that dogs will exhibit that give you hints towards, what kind of temperament they have. And bearing a bone is just a possessive trait. It doesn't mean that it doesn't necessarily mean that there's competition, although in this particular case, there's a history of that, especially since you indicated that the cats were actually taking his food. So that makes sense. It could be a coping mechanism then that developed. But a lot of times, even if the dog just does it, sometimes I've seen weird things. Sometimes you'll see a dog that will have something, right? Something of somewhat of value. And even if there's nothing, there's no dirt or anything, you'll see them like rubbing their nose on the ground as though they were burying it, but there was like nothing to bury because the item is on concrete. And so you'll see dogs doing that. I've seen dogs do that on their beds. So sometimes people will see them on, the dogs do the same thing on their beds. You give them a bone or a treat. on their bed, and even on their bed, they'll just kind of rub their nose as though they were putting dirt on it. So what I'm getting at is it can be such an inherent behavior that it even surpasses common sense even for the animal. When they're literally not burying anything, but they're just now going off of instinct.
So you would consider that normal behavior?
On some dogs, very normal. On some, yes.
Listening you say this, Regina's mom's little dog we have, occasionally you'll see her in her bed and she will take her little bone that she's not going to eat but gonna save, and you'll see that nose rubbing, trying to.
She'll bury it in the blankets, and then
Yeah.
if any other dog comes around, she'll growl or snap at them because she doesn't want them near it.
Yeah, basically what it is it's exactly what it looks like. I'm gonna save this for later. This is of value, and it is something typically that they consider valuable. They'll grab something, or you give them something, and they go, okay, this is valuable enough that I'm going to keep it to myself. And the best way to do that is to maintain control of that resource. And one of the ways to maintain control of that resource is by putting it in a special spot.
So here's a question. Like, I've seen no aggression whatsoever in this dog for the months that I've been around it.
Mm-hmm.
Is it another way for it just to avoid conflict by going and burying something with another animal coming up and not having to worry about trying to share it? Or
it could be, but it's not necessarily it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not going to have aggression. You know what I mean? So the way I look at these behaviors that dogs do, sometimes that are a little bit strange from a human perspective to dissect, is think of it as it's vocabulary. Like when we communicate, right, there are some things that we say, some things that we have mannerisms, we have idiosyncrasies about each one of us in the way we carry ourselves to other people, right? So dogs have sort of those same little things where they'll do certain things a certain way, like they'll vocalize a certain way, their body language is a certain way, they'll bury bones, they'll do little things like that. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm doing this because I'm stressed, or I'm doing this because I'm going to show aggression. Sometimes it's just part of their repertoire of communication. So to answer your question, it's not black and white. Okay. So the animal could bury it and show zero aggression, or the dog could bury it and show aggression, and then sometimes you'll see dogs that don't even bury it and will still show aggression.
Well, this kind of leads into the next one. So you're talking about stress, or could a dog burying behavior be a sign of stress or anxiety, or could it be?
It could, given the fact that we just got some history. Regina just told us that the cats were taking its food before, and how many cats were there? It's a bunch, right?
It's a cat colony, so there's like 25 or 30.
Okay, so you're talking about a lot of competition. Mm-hmm. So this dog may have had this behavior already ingrained, or it may have developed that behavior as a result of having to cope with that much competition.
Well, and the other thing about the dog is it was dumped on the river.
Yeah.
So it's had to fend for itself.
Yeah.
Before for a while.
Yeah, and
its owner got it.
So in this particular case, I would say, without knowing the dog, I would say it's probably a safe bet that for this particular individual, it is possibly the result of competition, which turned into some sort of stress, which then he developed a coping mechanism, which then was in the form of, I'm going to bury it because this is the one way that I can maintain control of that resource.
Kind of flip the question a little bit, or no, we're talking specifically on this one dog, but if you had a dog that was burying its bones in your backyard and it was becoming a little excessive, destructive to the yard.
Yeah, of course.
Is there a way to discourage this problematic behavior?
There's a couple of ways depending on what approach you want to take, there's always a trade-off. You know, for everything we do, there's a trade-off. So there's the least invasive way, which is management. Essentially, what that means is, if I'm going to give the dog something of value, I'm going to make sure that they don't have access to the outside.
Okay.
Or if I'm going to give them something of value, I'm going to give it to them under supervision. This is the least invasive way to deal with that. And it's you essentially as a human controlling that interaction and that behavior in regards to the resource.
So controlled environment and taking your time to make sure.
Yes, sir. Yeah, exactly. You're basically just going, all right, what's the easiest and least invasive way for me to address this? Is I'm just going to control when I give you this. And when I give it to you, I'm going to make sure that I'm supervised. And or when I give you this, I'm just going to give you no access to the outside. That is one way. Now, if I wanted to flip that and I wanted to go, I've tried that. It's, for whatever reason, it's just not convenient for me and I want to address it in a different manner, then yes, we can take a more invasive approach, which is then going to be through the form of some aversive, through the form of some corrections. Essentially, what that's going to look like is, we briefly discussed this, I think, before, but what it looks like is we let the dog know, here's the yard, do whatever you need to do, without me saying anything, and it's essential that you don't say anything. The moment I spot the dog starting to dig, there is a remote correction. And it has to be remote because if I step in, if I yell at the dog, if I run, if I go, stop doing that, what happens is the dog will just immediately make that connection to me. And then next time they'll just do it when I'm not watching. So by doing it remotely, what happens is there is no connection to you and the dog makes that association directly to the activity, which in this particular case would be digging.
And we've discussed that, and it just makes sense. I mean, like you said, dog goes to the trash, you get upset. Oh no, owner's upset.
Yeah.
About something.
Right. And the dog might just go, well, I don't know why he's so upset. The trash is such a pleasant thing, right? And yeah, some dogs will go, oh, I get it. You don't want me to go into the trash? I won't do that again. Because dogs interpret things in a very individual manner. So they'll perceive and interpret things different from one individual to the other. So even in one individual, I might go, hey, don't do that, right? That individual might go, oh, okay, I'm sorry, I won't do that. And then they're done. But there's a possibility that another individual might just go, oh, you don't like it when I do that. It's fine. I'll just make sure that you don't see it next time. And then they'll keep doing it.
Gotcha. Are there activities that you could provide? When I came up, I'm not even sure what a puzzle toy. I'm not sure if you.
Yeah, interactive toys. Yeah.
What would be an example of that?
They're like plastic looking things that you
There's so many
treats
kinds.
that-
Yeah.
you can put treats or whatever in them, and they have to open little sections to get their treats, or they have to dig to get their treats out. Stuff
So
like
that's one. I've heard a lot. I've had clients that have told me, yeah, we gave him one of those, and then what the dog would do is they just grab the whole thing and just slam it, and then the food would just go everywhere.
That's a resourceful dog.
Right.
those work great for cats. I can say
Right.
that.
For some dogs that could work. One interactive toy that works really well is, I think it's called a chew ball, and it's made by Starmark. Starmark is a company here in Texas. They make interactive toys, and they sell them basically all over the world. They're in Europe.
Chew ball?
I think it's called a chew ball, but made by Starmark. And it's a great toy. So it's such a simple concept too. It won Interactive Toy of the Year back so many years ago, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, so the premise, and now there's so many. Starmark was one of the first companies that made a bunch of these interactives. So basically what it is it's a ball with two holes on each end, and you put the kibble in there, and the holes are small. you can adjust the size of the hole. So if you have really large kibbles, you can make the holes a little bit bigger.
Okay.
And then you just put the food in there, and the dog, unlike a Kong, because it sounds like a Kong, but the Kong has a big hole at the bottom. The chew ball has just two holes that are, they're uniform, they're identical. So the kibble or the treats will roll out a little bit at a time. So they will come out, they just won't rush out.
Gotcha.
So the dog has to like move it, and then one or two pieces of kibble will come out. And so the dog has to keep rolling it. And even if the dog goes, even if you have a very intense dog, the type of dog that would flip that, that puzzle toy that we just talked about, and they go, I'm just gonna crunch on this, they'll crunch on it, the kibble is still gonna come out at about the same rate. So it'll keep them really occupied. So that's one type of interactive toy. And now there are so many that are similar to that same concept. You put the toy in there, and then just have to figure out how to get, I'm sorry, not the toy. You put the food in there,
Kibble.
and then the kibble, the treat, and then the dog has to figure out how to get it out. But anyway, so that's one way to do it. The other thing, I think what you were asking is, how do we give them something to do to prevent that, right? That's kind of where you were
It's
heading.
like an alternative activity. Like one of these examples here is like a digging box, and
Yeah.
I don't even know what that is.
So, yeah, I was actually going to go there too. So, if you want, because here's the thing, digging for some dogs is such a fulfilling activity because it's normal. Like, they're den animals. If you look at all their other canids, they do the same thing. They just dig. That's what canids do. They'll dig, right? So, for some dogs, that instinct to dig is so strong that they genuinely enjoy it. They want it so bad. So if you have one of those dogs, one of the ways to address it is to essentially put the digging on cue. And you can put it on cue one of two ways. You can actually teach them, when I say dig, go at it. Just have at it. You can dig as much as you want, right? And then if I don't tell you to dig, there is no digging, period. You just don't dig unless I tell you to dig, right? So, like for instance, if I do protection training, the dog only is allowed to bite when I tell him bite. He's not just supposed to go, I'm gonna bite whoever I want, whenever I want. There's gonna be a consequence. We're like, we don't do that. You only bite when I tell you you can bite. So digging would be the same thing. We'll let the dog know, hey, let's go out here on this hike. If I say dig, go at it. Just fulfill yourself. Dig a big ditch while I go enjoy the sunset, right? So that's one way to do it. The other way to do it is to provide an area, or to designate an area for your dog to dig. And this could be in the form of a sandbox, like an actual sandbox that you would have for a kid, right? It could be like that. Or it could just be you sectioning out a portion of your yard, and you go, that's the digging spot. As long as you dig there, it's safe. That's if obviously if you're okay with that, right? You could basically let the dog know that is a safe area to spot. If you dig, a safe area to dig. If you dig outside of that area, we don't do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's one way to do it.
Yeah, and you're right. We've had dogs who have absolutely no desire to dig, and then we have some that it's just like,
They love it.
it's just the tongue is wagging, the face is smiling, and they're just happiest when they can do, when they can drop right down into it.
Because what happens is when they dig, now this is a little bit slightly different topic than them burying, but the act of digging, it's such a self-rewarding activity because you have the surface, and every time they scratch, they just reveal new smells of that surface.
Wow.
So then they'll go, oh wow, I just got like this whiff, because every time you disturb surface, you get new smells. You can even tell that when you garden, right? When you start digging, you unearth some of these fresh smells. So the dogs will go, oh, that smells good, I'm gonna do it again. So they'll just keep digging and digging and digging and digging. So yeah, for some dogs, they just love that activity so much.
All right, that's to digging boxes, okay, and the puzzle toys. That's new to me.
Yeah, yeah.
I know we put toys out for the kittens and cats to play, and they love pushing the balls around in circles in some of these toys. So the next question, could diet or feeding habits influence why a dog would bury food or bones? And I didn't really think about this. Bone is a food, but they could be burying their food as well.
Yeah, really, if it's anything of value, that's generally the prerequisite, so to speak. They're not gonna bury something that is not valuable. Even if it's like a sock, when you go, why is that sock valuable? It's valuable because a lot of times it's valuable to you, right? So if it's valuable to, if it's a tissue, and the dog thinks, oh, that's valuable to mom, I'm gonna grab it, I'm gonna bury it, because sometimes dogs will do that. So with food, going back to your question, if the food is valuable enough, they're definitely gonna do it. And you were specifically asking, like, dietary changes, would that influence could that influence the burying?
We could. Some of the issues we've talked about in the past have been diet related. Could have been a cause, and then like
a diet deficiency, possibly.
Yes, and then understanding that in some cases here they could feel uncertain about the food availability.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if the dog, I guess, has gone without food.
Yeah.
At some duration.
For some, yeah, definitely. I've known dogs that have never gone a day without eating, and will grab something out of their bowl. They look kind of weird. They'll just look around, and then they'll go far away. That's another possessive behavior. They'll go far away, go to a corner, and then enjoy it, or they'll bury it. These dogs have never gone a day without eating. So anything is possible. I would say if we look at it and we go, could that dog possibly have or have had a nutritional deficiency where it just never got satisfied? Yeah, I could see in some individuals that could influence the burying behavior.
You kind of talked about this a little earlier in here, but the environment could influence the dog's tendency to bury bones. But like you said, I can give the dog, give Fido the bone, but I prevent Fido from going outside.
Right.
So now I've like reduced the environment is now you're inside. You can't bury, or you're going to have to go find a blanket to try to put it under.
Right.
But I guess the environment could be making it to where if I give you something of value and you do have access to outside, the environment being outside does encourage the dogs to want to go bury if they have that tendency.
Yeah, so if the dog, if you already have that kind of dog and you give it the item, and this is very likely gonna turn into the dog wanting to dig, well, you can supervise. So you can still give the dog access to the outside. You just don't let it dig. You just don't let it bury it. Do you know what I mean? Just don't let it bury the bone. So in that instance, what I would do is I would go, hey, we're gonna go outside. Here's your bone. Here's your toy. But every time you try to dig it, I'm just going to interrupt you. I'm going to, tell you to do something else or something along those lines. Because at that time, I'm not fixing it. I'm just managing it.
So I've just noticed something. You're not stopping. You're giving an alternative.
Yeah, I'm just basically letting him know, hey, let's go do something else. I'm going to call. I'm going to interrupt it. Because it's not like if my goal was to fix it, then I wouldn't say anything. Like I talked about earlier. I just wouldn't say anything, and I would just let him do it, and then I would give consequences for him doing it. But that would be on the addressing it angle. On the supervising it angle, I'm not addressing it, so on the supervising angle, I'm just gonna go, hey, get over here. Don't dig. Let's go do something else. So in that instance, there is no problem with me being associated with me telling it, hey, come on, let's go do something else. Let's not do that.
Okay. Do you know of a dog's breed that's more likely to do burying?
I've seen herding breeds do it.
Okay.
I've seen bully breeds do it. I haven't seen enough. I've seen that behavior, but I haven't seen it in large enough numbers for me to have a like a pattern. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because it is a possessive behavior. Possessive behaviors are independent of genetics.
Because I saw.
I mean, they can be, but typically they're not necessarily genetic related.
Okay. Because when I was doing some research on this, I saw that some of the possible causes could be a dog's breed, the environment, which we've talked about, and the dog's personality.
Yeah, so the personality, basically the temperaments, what we were talking about. So the temperament is the inherent traits of that particular individual. Breed-wise, yeah, I mean, we could have some dogs that are less likely to do it. You know, like some breeds that will probably be less likely to do it. Possibly would be your off the top of my head, maybe your sight hounds. Because sight hounds that doesn't mean that sight hounds won't do it. Just off the top of my head, a sight hound is not as interested in typically in possessing. They're more driven by movement. They're more driven by sight. So I would say maybe that would be one breed that would be less likely to do it. As far as a breed that would be more likely to do it, off the top of my head, off of my experience, I don't know that I've seen enough of a pattern to pinpoint it's these breeds that will do it.
Well, the first breed that came to mind to me was a yellow lab.
Yeah.
When I first got my lab home, I was like, oh, we've got it wasn't burying, but little holes here and there.
Just digging.
Yeah, the digging.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, I'm sure that somewhere at the bottom of those little diggings, there's a bone or something.
It could be. Sometimes the digging is an independently different behavior than the burying.
Well,
Well, since we have extra time today, just a few minutes anyway,
Mm-hmm.
tell us a little bit about what kind of training you do. A little bit about the different
Sure.
types.
Yeah, definitely. So I do essentially two types of training, which is, and I can break that down a little bit, but essentially one type of training is a done with you training, and another type of training is a done for you training. So a done with you training is more under the umbrella of private lessons. So when we do private lessons, I'm working with you and your dog. And the benefit of that is that the owner is involved and the owner is learning from the beginning. So they're very hands-on from the beginning. It's a huge benefit, and a lot of people like it. The other benefit of that is there are some behaviors that are best addressed on a one-on-one in a done with you option, because some of the problems that people have are very specific to their situation. So meaning it only happens maybe one member of the family. It happens with one particular neighbor. It happens with something very specific to their environment. So in a lot of those instances, a done with you option, which is private lessons, is the best option, because we can from the beginning work with you in your environment, with you learning this from the very beginning. The bit of the disadvantage of that, and everything's a trade-off, like I said earlier, the bit of the disadvantage or the trade-off with that would be the bulk of the workload is on the owner, because I'm seeing them once a week typically. So like if I see you Monday and we work on this, then I'll tell you, okay, between now and next Monday, I need you to just do a few of these things somewhat on a daily basis. You don't have to quit your job and do this as a part-time job or anything. But you're gonna have to just change a few things. So that's a done with you. Done for you is you leave the dog with me, and then I do the bulk of the training for you. So I'll do the thousands of repetitions of down, come, heel, place, that kind of stuff, right? And then the benefit of that is that if your schedule is very, very busy and hectic, I can do that for you. You don't have to, you're relieved of the the thousands of repetitions that you have to do. And then what we do after that is I'll have the client pick up the dog, and then I'll do a private lesson with them. So I'll show them, okay, this is what I did. This is how you're going to maintain. It's essentially what we're going to do with Hank, right?
Yes.
Essentially what we're going to do with Hank, formerly known as Spud.
Spud.
So when the owners get with me, I'm going to arrange a lesson, and then I'm going to tell them this is everything he learned. This is how you maneuver him. This is how you handle him. This is what he understands. And so in that example, it was a done for you. So I did the work for them. And those are basically the two options. Every lesson, every service that I do, whether it's the private lessons or the boarding and training, I do a 3-month follow-up with every client. So the 3-month follow-up means for those 3 months, which are very critical, very important, that you follow up on that. For those 3 months, I'm going to commit to them, and I'm going to, have them commit to their dog and the training for us to maintain this. So if any questions come up, they can call me. We can, book an appointment. They can come to me, do more private lessons at no additional cost, because it's just part of that program. So that's whether they come to me or whether, when applicable, whether I go to them. So those are basically it.
And you're located in Lomita,
Yes, ma'am.
which is a nice central spot for this area, also for Lampasas.
Yeah.
And Austin's not too far either, so it's a
Yeah.
good location.
Well, speaking of Hank, I was talking to his new owners this week, and they have a small trip at Thanksgiving planned, and they already have someone scheduled to stay at their house.
Oh, like a dog sitter.
Yes,
Yeah.
primarily just for Hank.
Yeah.
To ensure the transition, because he will only have been at the new home for about a month, and they don't want to remove him from the home. They want him at the home and have
Yeah.
someone be there.
So
Understand.
for those of you haven't listened before, Spud is our longest dog in foster care. He was born deaf, and he was born in November, and he's never known a home. And he recently got pre-adopted, and they're going to be picking him up this month. And William has been working with him to teach him extra commands and make his transition awesome, so that he can stay in his forever home. So we appreciate William and all his work on. He's had him for what, 10 weeks?
A few months.
No, it's
12 weeks.
it's
Yeah, I think
It's
it's
been
been
a
a few
while,
months.
yeah, because
So,
the
we
training would have
appreciate
been over at somewhere in June.
Yeah.
Right,
So we
right.
really appreciate all your work. He's
It's my
fostered
pleasure.
him after as well.
My pleasure.
Well, I think that's all we have, and I just want to thank everybody for listening. Again, check out our website at sansalvaanimals.com. That way you can see what animals we have available to adopt, and also if you'd like to donate. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next Wednesday.